Good morning, everybody. It's Miss Morgan. So I am reading you the second part of Chapter 2 after the lovely Mr. Burns started it yesterday. So let's start. Aunt Lucy had spent many long hours reading to him about the people he would meet. It had been a long journey, halfway round the world, and so Paddington's map had occupied most of the bathroom floor and used up most of Mr. Brown's shaving cream. With the little that was left, he tried writing his name again. He had several attempts and finally decided on Paddington. Don't think that's how you spell Paddington. It looked most important. It wasn't until a trickle of warm water landed on his nose that he realised the bath was full and was beginning to run over the side. With a sigh, he climbed up on the side of the bath, closed his eyes, held out his nose with one paw and jumped into the water. Splash! The water was hot and soapy and much deeper than he had expected. In fact, he had to stand on tiptoes, even to keep his nose above the surface. It was then that he had a nasty shock. It's one thing getting into a bath, it's quite another getting out, especially when the water comes up to your nose and the sides are slippery and your eyes are full of soap. He couldn't even see the taps to turn them off. He tried calling out for help. Help! First in a quiet voice, then very loudly. Help! Help! He waited a few moments, but no one came. Suddenly, he had an idea. What a good thing he was still wearing his hat. He took it off and began bailing out the water, which means he began trying to get it out of the bath. There were several holes in his hat because it was very old and had once belonged to his uncle, but the water didn't get much less, but at least it didn't get any more. That's funny, said Mr. Brown, jumping up from his armchair and rubbing his forehead. I could have sworn I felt a spot of water. Don't be silly, dear. How could you? Mrs. Brown, busy with her knitting, didn't even bother to look up. Mr. Brown grunted and returned to his newspaper. He knew he had felt something, but there was no point in arguing. He looked suspiciously at the children. Judy and Jonathan were busy writing their letters. How much does it cost to send a letter to Lima? Asked Jonathan. Judy was about to reply when another drop of water fell down from the ceiling, this time right onto the table. Oh gosh, she said, jumping to her feet, pulling Jonathan after her. There was an ominous wet patch right over their heads and right underneath the bathroom. Where are you going now, dear? Asked Mrs. Brown. Oh, just upstairs to see how Paddington's getting on. Judy pushed Jonathan through the door and shut it quickly behind them. Crikey, said Jonathan. What's up? It's Paddington, cried Judy over her shoulder as she rushed up the stairs. I think he's in trouble. She ran along the landing and banged loudly on the bathroom door. Are you all right, Paddington? She shouted. May we come in? Help! Help! Shouted Paddington. Please come in. I think I'm going to drown. Oh, Paddington. Judy leant over the bath and helped Jonathan lift the dripping and very frightened Paddington onto the floor. Oh, Paddington, thank goodness you're all right. Paddington lay on his back in a pool of water. What a good job I had my hat, he panted. Aunt Lucy told me never to be without it. But why on earth didn't you pull the plug out, you silly thing? Said Judy. Oh, Paddington looked crestfallen. I never thought of that. Jonathan looked admiringly at Paddington. Crikey, he said. Fancy you making all this mess. Even I've never made as much mess as this. Paddington sat up and looked around. The whole of the bathroom floor was covered in a sort of white foam, where the hot water had landed on his map of South America. It's a bit untidy, he admitted. I don't really know how it got like that. Untidy? Judy lifted him to his feet and wrapped a towel around him. Paddington, we've got to get a lot of work done before we go downstairs again. If Mrs. Bird sees this, I don't know what she'll say." "I do," exclaimed Jonathan. "She says it to me all the time." Judy began wiping the floor with a cloth. "Now, just you dry yourself quickly in case you catch a cold." Paddington began rubbing himself meekly with a towel. "I must say," he remarked, looking at himself in the mirror, "I am a lot cleaner than I was before. It doesn't look like me at all." Paddington did look much cleaner than when he had first arrived at the Browns. His fur was really quite light in colour and not dark brown as it had been, standing out like a new brush, except that it was soft and silky. His nose gleamed and his ears had lost all traces of the jam and cream. He was so much cleaner that when he arrived downstairs and entered the dining room some time later, everyone pretended not to recognise him. "The tradesman's entrance is at the side," said Mr. Brown from behind the paper. Mrs. Brown put down her knitting and stared at him. "I think you have come to the wrong house," she said. "This is number 32, not 34. Even Jonathan and Judy agreed there must be some mistake. Paddington began to get quite worried until they all burst out laughing and said how nice he looked now that he was brushed and combed and respectable. They made room for him in a small armchair by the fire, and Mrs. Bird came in with another pot of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast. "Now, Paddington," said Mr. Brown when they were all settled, "suppose you tell us about yourself and how you came to Britain." Paddington settled back in his armchair, wiped a smear of butter from his whiskers, put his paws behind his head and stretched out his toes towards the fire. He liked an audience, especially when he was warm and the world seemed such a nice place. "I was brought up in the darkest Peru," he began, "by my Aunt Lucy. She's the one that lives in the home for retired bears in Lima." He closed his eyes thoughtfully. After a hush fell over the room and everybody waited expectantly, after a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown coughed loudly. "It doesn't seem a very interesting story," he said impatiently. He reached across and poked Paddington with his pipe. "Well, I never," he said. "I do believe he's fallen asleep." Oh, I wonder what's going to happen in the next chapter. You've got another teacher tomorrow who's going to read that part for you. I wonder if you can guess who that's going to be. My question or my task for you is if you can make your very own map, maybe not out of shaving foam. You could use colouring pencils or pens and paper, or you could make a collage. And I wonder if you could do it of Coventry or the UK or even of your house. Have a good Easter. Bye.